hate to say it, but his parents have been feeling unwell as of late, and I'm staying with them to help take care of Alex.
Oh, so it's serious.
Oh, no, it's not serious. Nothing terminal. It's just a touch of consumption.
So before we get started, we just wanted to clarify we're going to post this on Monday, so feel free to be as spoilerific as you want to be.
Yes.
Great. Perfect.
We are Trace and Joe with the Horror Queers, part of Bloody FM, Bloody Disgusting's podcast network. But so
we love Bloody Disgusting.
Yeah.
Amazing.
We do too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so right off the bat, we'll throw you a softball. So rather than outright remake the original Faces of Death, which has its own kind of notoriety, you opted to take a meta approach where, the original film exists in this world. Obviously, I feel like a straight remake of the original film would be really difficult to pull off. So that's one reason. But what made y'all decide to go in that direction for this film?
I think we never really saw it as a remake. I think, we were approached with, from Legendary and Don Murphy and Susan Montford. Don and Susan had the rights, and they'd been looking for a way into something about Faces because there was a recognition that, there was a story to tell there. And also, I think from the standpoint of the studio, they thought that there was some value to squeeze out of some old IP. And when we got the project, I think what we found interesting about it was that this thing that started on film and movie theaters that then blew up on VHS tape, we had seen for the first time in bite-sized pieces on Rotten.com or eBaum's. And so I think that what we realized was that, this thing that used to be this cursed, hidden, difficult to obtain object was now being beamed into the, pockets of everybody on the face of the planet 24/7. And that was a really interesting thing to make a movie about. And so for us, it wasn't really meta so much as it's a film that says, where is Faces of Death today? And that answers that honestly, being if somebody wanted to remake Faces of Death, but actually killed people, that would probably do pretty well. And I think once we kind of figured that out, then we had a lot of fun just building a story around it.
Okay, so between this and Cam, you both seem to have this strong interest in an idea about how the internet has affected modern society. So we noticed with Cam, it obviously is based a little bit more on some of your own personal experiences in that world, but it felt very open-minded and not judgmental of its characters. In fact, if anything, it asked the audience to embrace that. Whereas this film does feel like a bit more of an indictment of internet culture. So we're wondering, how do you see that differentiation? Is it just time?
I mean, first of all, I don't know if I want to necessarily indict our characters, but we can get into that. I do feel like the internet overall has gotten a lot darker from when we were making Cam. I think that 2020 and the advent and rise of TikTok did something to us. And I think that the way that we engage in the internet, the amount that we doom scroll, the amount that we are served violence on our phones has exponentially increased since then. So I do think that we're dealing with something that feels a lot darker, and were we to be treated with more levity, I think it would feel disingenuous to how the internet actually feels to us now, which as filmmakers is kind of what we're always trying to tap into, is how does culture make us feel right now? In terms of indicting our characters, to us, it's less that Margot maybe posts at the end and therefore, becomes the thing she's fighting. For us, it's about pointing a finger at what else is she supposed to do, right? And we're kind of all victims of this system where we are kind of being constantly manipulated by these algorithms, constantly manipulated by social media to keep us more and more alienated, more and more isolated from each other, and further apart as we kind of are served these very dehumanizing little bite-sized pieces of each other. And I think we kind of just want to hold a mirror up to that system rather than necessarily indicting any specific person for engaging in that system, because we ourselves are engaged in that system.
I was just going to say, because this just dawned on me as I was thinking about this question, because what I have not thought about at all in comparison to Faces is that Cam opens with Alice fake killing herself on camera, right?
Yes.
Because it does well. Right? Because this violence sells. And ultimately, and again, I cannot believe that this has just occurred to me, but that Cam ends with Alice committing a real act of violence against herself to prove that she's a flesh and blood person. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a very, very similar thing happening in Faces of Death, which is that like, it's really, I think, in both movies, a lot of the darkness comes from the fact that when you're performing online, when you're putting yourself online, you're kind of creating this version of yourself that exists in totally virtual space. And so how do you actually prove what's happening in the real world given that? And I think that, in many ways, violence in the movies, I think, is just a way of talking about that kind of like attention getting performativity, whereas ultimately you see it in violent acts, but you see it in all sorts of digital performance.
I feel it feels more like an indictment of internet culture, or even the audience itself, more so than it does the character of Margot. Is kind of what I walked away from the film saying, because I like that, because I mean, as you said, we are all part of that culture, and so I like leaving a movie being like, I think that movie's like trying to school me on something.
But I think I don't ever feel like I'm indicting the audience, and I have no desire to indict the audience, because I think that, we've always had communal viewings of violence, right? You used to, I would rather people go to a Quentin Tarantino movie than a public hanging. You know what I mean? And I think that actually the Tarantino movie kind of satisfies the desire we have for the hanging. I think the problem is real world violence. The problem is actual people getting hurt, not people play acting with blood cannons. And I think that one of the things that the internet has done is it has kind of like separated us from each other and alienated us from each other. It's told us that acts of actual violence are one of the ways to connect. And so I think that what we really mean to indict is as Isa said, these systems that are profiting off of this stuff, and the systems that are not protecting us. And I think that one of the fingers that we also point in the movie is, as I said, at like the very same system that looks at Faces of Death and say, let's squeeze some value out of this. It's the exact same impulse. It's a way of hijacking human attention. And I think that we hope that some of the ways in which this movie is a genre movie, it is a slasher movie, it is trying to satisfy some sort of audience demand, is actually part of the satire of the movie.
One thing I really liked, and from the satire approach to the film, is what Margot chooses to just flag and what she chooses to pull from the site. And I noticed that normally what she chooses to fully just delete are things of a sexual nature as opposed to of a violent nature. And that feels like a critique of American culture, or maybe something even larger than that. Could you speak to that?
I mean, I think absolutely. I think as a culture, we are much more sensitive to sex, expressions of sexuality, than violence. Absolutely. And I think more than, Margot having necessarily even agency in these moments, she's a good employee, right? She's doing her job. And so she's kind of being told, like, these are the things you take off the platform. These are the things you leave on the platform. And if those things make you uncomfortable, then like, it's important to look at that, because I think these are very real examples. I think especially coming from a sex work background, like we see this all the time on all of the traditional platforms, where work that is sex or sex leaning or queer leaning tends to be censored a lot more than like some of the most graphic violence that you can imagine.
Yep. It's definitely something we ourselves have noticed hosting a queer podcast, where we've gotten slapped a couple of times, and it's like, it's a picture of a shirtless man. But okay, go off, internet.
I think it's just because we have queer in our title. I think that stabs in the back every time, but I digress.
No, exactly. But right, that's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
So you did mention a little bit of satire, and obviously you've gotten in trouble with the MPA, hence the censoring of the marketing and that kind of stuff. But like,
to be clear, the MPAA censored the censored posters.
Because they're fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, but but I think that what's funny is that you go to the movie theater and there's plenty of blood-soaked heroines front and center on a movie poster. Yeah. But I think the irony is that the second that you draw the viewer's attention to the fact that there's maybe a little bit of a hypocritical censorship thing going on when it comes to the MPAA's relationship with violence, that becomes undesirable speech for them. And I think that, like, yeah, that to me is the great irony.
Yeah, and we saw that with their actual engagement with our content, right? Like, ultimately, we didn't cut anything from the movie. Like, you are seeing the version of the movie we wanted. But there was one moment where I think it's the scalp is being pulled off.
The monkey scene.
The monkey scene, but now it's a human. Yeah, and we're pulling his scalp off. And there's a moment of that on screen on Margot's content moderation platform that they actually kind of, like, they never tell you like outright, like cut this, but it was like, all right, we need to trim this up a little bit. And so we trimmed, I don't know, some frames.
A second and a half.
A second, we trimmed it. But what was so funny is that exact same shot, that exact same moment plays later in the film on Charlie's phone. She's holding the phone out.
The same second and a half.
We kept that second and a half in there, right? It's the
didn't make a difference, right?
Content, and it's totally for the MPAA, we feel like, about the context of the image, in the context of censorship, in the context of a moderation platform, they want us to cut it. But in the context of just like on a phone, totally fine.
But that's so silly, though. I mean, like that obviously goes into like a much deeper conversation about the MPAA and censorship. But it's like, it's the same fucking footage. And I mean, I guess, the context is different, but I don't. It's not that different to me. I don't know.
But no, the thing about the context is that you know this with the MPAA, right? The way that like, movies that you see something like They Will Kill You, for instance, great film, love it. But that's a movie with like 15 tons more blood than we have in ours. And it's so
cartoony.
It's an easy arc because it's cartoony. So it's like, wait, so the problem is asking the audience to feel bad about violence? The problem is making the audience feel disturbed about violence? The more disturbing the violence it is, the more of a problem it is. That feels a little bit weird, doesn't it?
I think that just goes to the MPA doesn't trust audiences, but at the same time, though, looking at the world today, do you trust audiences? Like, I don't know.
But we know very well that like there isn't much of a connection between violent behavior and violent film or content. We know that there's a connection between like suburban alienation and violent behavior and drugs and violent behavior and poverty and violent behavior. Why aren't we putting our resources towards trying to actually curb the things that create violence in our society? And that's the thing, is things like the MPAA, I believe, are a total smokescreen. They're a way of getting us to think that the problem with our world exists in fictional images, not with the actual things that are occurring.
Because they want to censor art. They don't actually care about real life.
Yeah.
Well, then piggybacking off of that with real life. So, I mean, like films about snuff films and like other awful online content have been around, I mean, for several decades. I'm thinking about like going back to like Amenabar's Thesis or Schumacher's 8mm or something more modern like The Den. For y'all, what distinguishes Faces of Death from films like that?
I think they're all their own thing in a sense. I think that one of the things that we always felt about this project was that, it existed inside of kind of a subgenre that we love, which is, I would say started with Blow Up. It invented this kind of genre of the looking at stuff, thriller, paranoid movie. And then you see that come up again and again with Blowout, with The Conversation, with, like movies like 8mm, like Kimmy, it's this kind of like tradition. And so for us, one of the big touchstones of this project was that we wanted it to be in the lineage of those looking movies. And ultimately it's its own thing. It's a blend of other things too, like, Peter Bogdanovich's Targets and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, Maniac, and all sorts of other kinds of influences. But we hope that they all kind of blend into something that, is its own thing in a certain way.
So following up on that, because you mentioned earlier that this also turns into your own variation of a slasher film, and that's really evident in the climax where, audiences who are coming for the blood and the gore and they want to see, our antagonist and our protagonist really go at it, they're going to get that in the climax. How did you balance some of your desires with the social commentary with the more conventional genre trappings, right? Because you're commenting on the violence, but then you're also having to give the audience that.
Well, the violence isn't real, number one. and number two, I think that's part of it, right? I think there's something interesting in, again, there being a market demand for a Faces of Death movie that's a slasher. And so we start the movie in this very kind of grounded, recognizable place. But in the same way that kind of the attention economy is pushing Arthur to kill, the attention economy is pushing the market conditions of our movie to become a slasher. And there's this weird way in which I think that Arthur feels almost as much like he's directing these snuff films as he is directing these kind of like escape the house set pieces. And I think that this is just a little bit of like, it's just a feeling that I think we have that for me makes it really fun. It's something that you obviously get with something like Funny Games too. And I think it's really interesting and fun to see how people feel about the way that the movie devolves into kind of something that feels like a conventional slasher, because
Mhm.
they're kind of like, they don't always understand or immediately get if they're like this starts at such a grounded place and then becomes so crazy, like it's like, yes, that's the point, that's what's happening to all of us, that's the direction that we're all being pushed in. So yeah, I think
Yeah. There's also a way in which Arthur is kind of like authoring his own slasher movie. Like I think there's a moment we talk about where he like is looking for Margot in the garage, and it's like he walks past and there's this kind of moment where it's like, does he maybe see her? Does he maybe not see her? Does he want her to maybe escape a little bit so that he can chase her? And there's just like little hints of that throughout the film, where I kind of like seeing Arthur as someone who is really like architecting his entire life around these ideas.
it's pop art Hanukkah.
Well, and actually, so on Arthur though, so because he has some obsessive compulsive tendencies in the film and seems to be a bit of a neat freak. Did that come from y'all or did that come from Montgomery?
Both. There's definitely some of it in the script, and then there's definitely a level that Dacre brought to it that kind of leveled it up. A lot of the textures, a lot of the costume, the weird like skin suit that he's wearing, the mesh netting, a lot of that came from Dacre and him kind of saying that he wanted to engage with textures in a really obsessive and kind of neurotic way. So he brought a lot of that into it. But some of the things that were in the script, for example, were like, one of my favorite moments in the script is Arthur when he types 3 question marks and then deletes 2 and then
Yes.
types like that is in the script, and so a lot of that neuroticism like was there the whole time.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but as we mentioned, queer horror podcast, so we need to ask about your proclivity for working with a bunch of queer talent, and I think our listeners would also be specifically interested if you could tell us how you managed to get Charlie XCX in there for a cameo.
Amazing. First of all, we're queer filmmakers, so we love collaborating with queer collaborators always. But I think for us also, both our lead characters, or not both our leads, sorry, Margot and Ryan are both queer in the film. And I think that was important to us because oftentimes I feel like a lot of the representation of queerness in mainstream media has to be about queerness for some reason. And for us, we want representation of just like queer people existing. And so, they are both queer characters. You can catch it if you're, paying attention, but it's not about their queerness. That's not what this movie's about. And I think in terms of Charlie, I mean, she called us actually, which was kind of insane. Like we were already in pre-production. She had seen some like Hollywood Reporter announcement or something about the film, and she called us and was like, I'm a fan of the original, I'm a fan of your work, like I want to be in the film. We had one role left, which we were like, well, it's yours. And so that's how that came to be. Yeah.
I'm actually really glad you confirmed the queerness too, because I even in my notes when I was watching it, I was like, I put Margot lesbian ? Because
Yeah,
Ryan has that line where he says like he says like, is that something lesbians do? But I think that's the only reference to her being a lesbian in the film.
There's 2 other ones. If you want the little moments, her sister, and one of her sister's voicemails, she says, "I wish you would hurry up and like get a girlfriend already, so you can stop being something like that." And then also her Reddit handle is like Lavender Girl 98, which is obviously like
I should have found that one actually.
Yeah. So there's these little moments that I like putting in there.
But I like that, as you said, it's not like this movie isn't about their journey as queer people; it's about their journey as people.
And that's the thing, is that, oftentimes I think when movies kind of just assume heterosexuality about their characters, there are like these teeny little things, like an aside of what a sister might say. And I think that, again, that just creates this perception that like the protagonist is always hetero. And I think they just feel like, no, this person has a sexual identity, a gender identity. We also work with Josie Toda in the movie,
Yes.
a trans actress, but that's not really a part of her character. That's just who she is. And so I think that for us, it's just about, feeling like there's these other stories that can be told with queer characters, which is, I think, how, as Isa said, we feel as queer people.
Is Toda's character in the Sam a trans character in the film in your mind? Because I don't think that's actually ever addressed.
I think that is something that there is. That's It's in the movie. It's in the movie, but I think that's something that people have yet to unpack about the film, and it is the deepest and darkest layer to Arthur. But I think we haven't really talked about it much, and so we'll let people.
God, it's been so many years.
We should let people
About Arthur to discover. I think the fact, if you like the movie and you enjoyed it, watch it again.
Think about the garage.
Pay attention to the garage. Pay deep attention to.
There is something in the garage that.
A lot of Easter eggs in this movie. Like when I tell you, every single choice in this movie, every single shade of color is something that we have discussed ad nauseum. So like, yes, but like, you just got to keep looking for it.
Okay. I accept that.
Challenge accepted. Yes. Okay, well, that is our time. Thank you both for being generous and elaborating on some things. I also just wanted to say justice for How to Blow Up a Pipeline, because people fucking slept on that movie, and it was my favorite movie of that year. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Great to talk to you guys.
Likewise. Thank you all.